The town was small, quiet, and ordinary, the kind of place where people knew each other's names and routines. Children played on the dusty streets in the afternoons. Shopkeepers opened their stores at the same time every morning, and evenings were filled with the sound of neighbors greeting one another on their way home. Yet beneath this simple surface, the town carried stories, whispered tales that had been passed around for years. They were not about ghosts or old legends, but about strange lights in the night sky and odd noises that came from the direction of the abandoned military base on the edge of town. Most people laughed at the stories. They called them wild imagination or late-night dreams. But there were also people who lowered their voices whenever the topic came up, as though speaking too much about it would invite something they did not want. For Daniel, a 34-year-old man working as a security guard, the stories had always been half a joke and half a mystery. He told others that he didn't believe in such things, but inside him lived a quiet curiosity. Something about the old base and its forgotten history tugged at his thoughts. Daniel's life was simple. He worked nights at the base, earning just enough to pay for his small house and take care of his mother, who lived with him. His routine rarely changed. He liked his coffee strong. He liked the night air when it was calm, and he liked the peace of watching over a place that seemed long forgotten by the world. The base had not been used for active military work in decades. Most of it was silent, with rust on the fences and dust on the walls. Still, a few guards like Daniel were hired to keep watch. They were told it was for safety and record purposes. One evening, while Daniel was starting his shift, he noticed something unusual. A group of senior officers he had never seen before arrived in black cars. They moved quickly and spoke quietly, as though they did not want anyone to hear. Daniel stood near the gate, pretending not to pay attention, but his eyes followed them closely. They walked toward one of the locked sections of the base that had not been opened in years. Later that night, as he was doing his rounds, Daniel saw a faint glow coming from behind the old hangar. It was not the light of a torch or a lamp, but something different, softer and bluish, like the kind of light that does not belong in an abandoned place. He felt his heart race, but kept walking, trying to act normal. Curiosity gnawed at him. The next morning, in the town, people were already talking. Some had seen lights in the sky above the base. Others claimed they heard humming sounds late in the night. The shopkeeper at the corner store joked that aliens must be back to visit. A group of young boys exaggerated the story, saying they had seen a flying ship. Everyone laughed, but Daniel noticed that not everyone found it funny. Some old men shook their heads quietly, as if the events were reminders of something they had lived through long ago. That night, Daniel's shift partner, a man named Harris, who had been working at the base since the early days, leaned closer to him while they sat in the guard cabin. Harris had gray hair and lines on his face that showed both age and worry. He spoke softly, almost whispering. "You've noticed the changes, haven't you?" he asked. Daniel nodded, not sure how much to admit. Harris continued. "They always said this base was empty, but that was never the full truth. Years ago, before you started here, there were experiments. Some of us called it madness. Others called it power, and there was something they referred to as the Queen." Daniel frowned. "Queen?" he asked. Harris only nodded and looked away, as if the word itself carried weight too heavy to explain. For the next few days, Daniel couldn't get the word out of his mind. Queen. What did it mean? Was it a name, a person, a machine? He remembered how the senior officers had moved with such urgency, how they had gone into locked areas that were never opened. He remembered the blue light, soft and strange. He thought of the old stories from the town, the ones that spoke of odd sounds and strange shapes in the sky. Suddenly, they no longer felt like harmless jokes. The base began to change as well. More officers arrived. Areas that Daniel used to patrol freely were now marked with signs that read, "Restricted." Guards with higher ranks than him carried sealed boxes in and out of the underground tunnels. Trucks came at night, their headlights turned off, their cargo hidden under black covers. The air around the place felt heavier, as if everyone was holding back a secret. Back in town, people were uneasy. A woman who lived near the hills said she saw men in uniforms taking equipment into the caves. A farmer said his cows refused to graze near the base. Even children, who usually laughed at ghost stories, stopped playing near the fences. Something was happening. Something that touched every corner of their quiet lives, even if no one could fully explain it. Daniel found himself caught in the middle. He was a simple guard, paid to watch and report. Yet now he stood at the edge of something bigger than anything he had known. Every time he looked at the sealed doors of the base, he felt a strange pull, as if the place itself wanted him to know what was inside. He tried to ignore the feeling, but it returned again and again. One evening, after his shift ended, Daniel walked home slowly through the quiet streets. The stars above were bright, the night calm, yet his mind was restless. He thought of his mother, who always told him, "The truth is like the sun. You can cover it for a while, but not forever." Those words echoed in his head as he remembered Harris's warning, the blue glow, and the whispers about the Queen. He knew that something was concealed inside the base, something that had been hidden from the world for years. As Daniel entered his home and closed the door behind him, he felt a chill, not from the night air but from the weight of his thoughts. For the first time, the stories he had once laughed at no longer felt like stories. They felt like the beginning of something real, something that was slowly unfolding before his eyes. And deep inside, Daniel sensed that he would not be able to stay just a guard for much longer. He was becoming part of a secret that was waiting to be uncovered. The night was colder than usual when Daniel began his shift at the base. A strong wind whistled through the fences, carrying with it the dry smell of dust and old metal. Daniel wore his thick jacket, but it did little to calm the uneasiness he felt inside. Something had changed in the past few days, something he could not name but could sense all around him. The base, once quiet and forgotten, now felt alive, as if it was waiting for something to happen. Around midnight, as he walked along the outer wall, Daniel noticed a sudden flash in the sky. At first, he thought it was lightning, but the night was clear and filled with stars. The flash grew brighter, turning from white to orange, then to a strange shade of green. His heart began to beat faster as the light moved downward, faster and faster, until it looked like a burning star falling straight toward the ground. Then came the sound, a deep, rolling boom that shook the air and made the ground tremble beneath his feet. Daniel froze in place. His first thought was that a plane had crashed, but this was no ordinary crash. The object disappeared behind the hills near the underground section of the base, followed by a low rumble that seemed to echo from deep inside the earth. Seconds later, alarms went off. Red lights began to flash across the base, and guards ran in different directions, shouting orders that Daniel couldn't fully hear. Trucks started their engines and searchlights lit up the night sky. He stood still for a moment, unable to move, until one of the senior officers shouted at him to report to the checkpoint. Daniel obeyed, but his mind was racing. He had seen it with his own eyes. Something had fallen from the sky and landed inside the restricted area. The next morning, the town was buzzing with talk. Some said it was a meteor. Others claimed it was a plane. But many, remembering the old stories, whispered that it was not from this world at all. Daniel overheard conversations at the bakery, at the corner store, even from children who repeated what their parents had said at home. Everyone had an opinion, but no one had answers. When Daniel returned to the base that evening, the atmosphere was different. Armed guards had been placed at every entrance. Whole sections were closed off. Senior officers walked around with files in their hands, their faces stern and unreadable. Daniel and the other low-ranking guards were kept away from the center of activity, but they could hear the sounds: heavy machinery working underground, strange humming noises that seemed to come from deep below the surface. During his break, Daniel sat with Harris again. The older guard's face was pale, and his eyes looked tired, as though he had seen something he wished he could forget. "Do you know what that was last night?" Daniel asked him quietly. Harris hesitated before answering. "I've seen something like this before," he said. "Back then they called it a test, but it wasn't just a test. They were hiding something in those tunnels, something they called the Queen." Daniel frowned. What is it, a weapon? Harris shook his head slowly. Not exactly. It was an experiment. Some said it was a creature, others said it was a machine. Nobody knew the whole truth, not even us guards. But we knew enough to be afraid, and now it looks like she has fallen again. The word fallen made Daniel uneasy. He thought of the object he had seen crashing into the ground. Could it really be connected to what Harris was talking about? Was this queen real, or just another story to scare new guards like him? That night, Daniel's patrol took him near the old hangar. Normally, it was silent and dark, but now he saw lights spilling from the cracks around its doors. He also noticed a group of men carrying something inside, a large container covered with metal sheets. The container shook slightly, as though something inside it was still alive or still moving. Daniel wanted to step closer, but another guard stopped him, ordering him to turn back. The days that followed only deepened the mystery. Officially, the government released a statement to the public saying a satellite had malfunctioned and fallen near the base. Newspapers printed the same story. But Daniel could tell it was a lie. Satellites didn't glow green as they fell. Satellites didn't make the ground shake for miles. And satellites certainly weren't carried into hangars under heavy guard hidden from view. One evening, Daniel overheard two officers speaking in hushed tones. He could only catch fragments of their conversation, but the words chilled him. Containment breach, recovery team, and queen unstable. He walked away quickly, pretending he hadn't heard anything, but those words replayed in his mind all night. Meanwhile, the town grew more nervous. People claimed they saw military trucks moving through the streets at night. Some said they heard strange noises coming from the hills, like low roars or humming that shook their windows. A farmer swore he saw figures in the fields at dawn, not quite human, moving too quickly to be normal. Of course, others said he was just tired or imagining things, but deep down the people of the town knew something unusual was happening. For Daniel, curiosity was mixing with fear. He wanted to know the truth, but he also felt that the truth might be more dangerous than he imagined. Each night, as he stood, watch, he felt the pull of the restricted areas. He wanted to open the locked doors to see what was hidden beneath the base. Yet every time he thought of it, Harris's voice came back to him. We knew enough to be afraid. One night, as Daniel walked past the underground tunnel entrance, he noticed a faint sound. It was not machinery nor voices. It was something else, a slow, rhythmic thumping like a heartbeat. He stopped and listened carefully. The sound was coming from deep below the ground, steady and alive. His chest tightened, and his breath caught in his throat. Something was down there. Something that had fallen. Something they were hiding. Daniel walked away quickly, but he knew he could no longer pretend he was just a guard doing his job. He had seen the lights, he had felt the earth shake, and now he had heard the heartbeat of whatever was beneath the base. The fall of the Queen, as Harris called it, was not just a story. It was real. And Daniel had just stepped into the middle of it. The nights grew longer for Daniel as the mystery inside the base deepened. He no longer felt like an ordinary guard watching over old buildings. He felt like he was standing at the edge of a secret that wanted to reveal itself, even if the people in power tried to keep it hidden. Every sound, every shadow, every whisper inside the base carried weight. The memory of the falling object and the heartbeat he had heard underground stayed with him wherever he went. One evening, Daniel was assigned to patrol the western sector, the area closest to the underground tunnels. The place was quiet, almost too quiet, with only the hum of distant machinery breaking the silence. As he walked near the old storage sheds, he noticed a narrow passage between two buildings he had never seen before. It was half covered with metal sheets and looked unused, but Daniel's instincts told him otherwise. He paused for a long time, glancing around to make sure no one was watching, before slipping through the gap. Inside, he found a door. It was heavy and rusted, but not locked. Pushing it open carefully, he stepped into a narrow stairwell that led downward. The air was damp and smelled of earth, as though the place had not been touched in years. He hesitated for a moment, then slowly began to descend. Each step echoed in the stillness, making his heartbeat louder in his ears. At the bottom, Daniel found himself in a dimly lit corridor. The walls were lined with pipes, and faint light bulbs flickered overhead. It felt abandoned, yet he could sense it was still in use. He followed the corridor, his footsteps soft, until he reached a large metal door. On it, he saw words painted in faded red. Project Queen. Authorized personnel only. His breath caught in his throat. The word was there, written clearly. Queen. This was the answer to the whispers, the warnings, the strange stories. He touched the cold surface of the door, and for a moment fear told him to turn back. But curiosity pushed him forward. The door was locked with a keypad. Daniel knew he had no way of opening it. Frustrated, he turned to leave. But then his eyes caught something lying on the floor nearby, a file folder, partly buried under dust and dirt. It must have fallen from someone's hands long ago. He picked it up carefully and tucked it under his jacket before leaving the corridor and climbing back up the stairs. That night, when his shift ended and he returned home, Daniel waited until the house was quiet and his mother was asleep. He sat at his small desk, pulled the curtains shut, and opened the folder. Inside were documents, photographs, and handwritten notes. His hands trembled as he flipped through the pages. The first pages spoke of an experiment that had started decades ago, long before he was born. Scientists and military officials had worked together on something called Project Queen. The goal, according to the papers, was to create a new kind of leader, a human enhanced with technology, intelligence, and abilities far beyond ordinary people. They believed this leader could guide humanity into a new era of progress and control as Yar. Daniel read further. The details grew darker. The project had not gone as planned. The experiments produced strange results: people who were no longer fully human, machines that behaved unpredictably, and genetic changes that scientists could not control. The notes described instability, mutation, and loss of containment. The Queen, it seemed, was the most powerful creation, but also the most dangerous. Daniel stared at the photographs inside the folder. Most were blurry and old, but they showed what looked like a tall figure with wires and tubes connected to her body. Her eyes glowed faintly in the dim light of the photo, and her skin looked pale, almost metallic in places. She did not look like an alien, but neither did she look entirely human. His hands shook as he turned to the last page, where a single line was written: Containment must be maintained at all costs. If the Queen falls, the truth will surface. Daniel leaned back in his chair, trying to calm his racing mind. The words explained everything: the secrecy, the strange lights, the crash, the heartbeat underground. The Queen was not from another world. She was not an alien. She was the result of human ambition, hidden away because the world was not ready to know. The next night at the base, Daniel felt different. Every locked door and every guarded tunnel seemed to whisper the truth he now carried. He could not stop thinking about the Queen, about the people who had worked in the shadows for so long. He also thought about the people in town, who laughed at the rumors but were unknowingly living next to a secret bigger than they could imagine. During his break, he met Harris again. The older guard looked at him carefully, as though he could sense that Daniel knew something. Daniel thought for a long moment, then quietly asked, "What would happen if the truth came out?" Harris's eyes narrowed. "It would shake everything," he replied. "People would realize their leaders lied to them. They would know that science was used not to heal or to help, but to control. And once the truth escapes, it can never be hidden again." He sighed deeply. "That is why they protect it with such fear. That is why we were told never to ask questions." Daniel nodded, but inside him a storm was building. He felt torn between fear and responsibility. He knew something that most of the world did not. He had evidence in his hands, proof that the Queen existed, that she had fallen, and that the truth was being buried under layers of lies. That night, when Daniel returned to his post near the tunnels, he heard the sound again, the slow, steady thumping, like a heartbeat. Only this time, it was louder. The ground beneath his feet vibrated softly with each beat, as though whatever was hidden below was growing stronger. Daniel stood still, his breath caught in his chest. He thought of the folder hidden in his house, of the photographs and the words about instability and failure. He realized then that the Queen was not gone. She was still alive, still contained beneath the base, and the crash he had witnessed had only awakened what had been concealed for years. As the sound echoed around him, Daniel knew his life had changed forever. He was no longer just a guard keeping watch. He was a witness to a truth that could not stay hidden forever. The Queen had fallen, and in her fall, Daniel had uncovered the beginning of a story that would change everything he thought he knew about his town, his job, and even his world. Daniel could not sleep peacefully anymore. Each night he returned from the base with more questions than answers. The folder he had found was hidden beneath the loose floorboard in his room, but its contents haunted his mind even when his eyes were closed. He dreamed of flickering lights, the sound of a heartbeat rising from the ground, and a tall figure with pale skin and glowing eyes waiting in the shadows. At the base, things grew even more secretive. Sections once open to guards like Daniel were now locked, and patrols were shifted in confusing patterns. Senior officers no longer spoke freely. Their orders were short and sharp. Trucks kept coming at night, carrying equipment into the tunnels. Some of the guards whispered that they had seen cages being rolled underground, though no one dared to speak loudly. Daniel's role as a simple guard now felt heavier. He was expected to act as though nothing was happening, to salute officers, and walk his routes as if he were blind. But he was not blind anymore. He knew what lay beneath, and he could feel the weight of that knowledge pressing on him every moment. One evening, Harris warned him again. They sat in the cabin, drinking bitter coffee, when Harris leaned closer and said, "You need to be careful, Daniel. People who ask too many questions here don't last long. I've seen them disappear, sometimes transferred, sometimes simply gone without explanation. Keep your head down." But Daniel could not keep his head down. That very night, he overheard two officials near the tunnel entrance. They were not aware that he stood in the shadows listening. Their words were urgent. "The Queen is unstable. If she breaks containment again, there will be no hiding it. We must move her or end it before outsiders notice." Daniel's blood ran cold. The Queen was alive and unstable. She was not just a memory of the project, but a living result of it. He returned home that night with a heavy chest. His mother asked him why he looked pale, but he simply shook his head and said he was tired. He could not tell her the truth. How could he explain that beneath their town, something inhuman was waiting to be released? In the following days, Daniel started writing notes of everything he learned. He listed the dates of unusual activity, the conversations he overheard, and the signs of secrecy. He copied pages from the folder and hid them in different places, some in his own house, some buried near the hills. He knew he could not trust anyone fully, not even Harris, because the danger was too great. If someone tried to silence him, at least the truth would not disappear. But the more he tried to protect the truth, the more dangerous his life became. He noticed strangers in town watching him. At the bakery, a man he had never seen before followed him with his eyes until Daniel left. At the base, he found his locker searched, though nothing was missing. One evening, as he walked home, he felt certain that footsteps were following him through the dark streets. When he turned, the street was empty. The people in the town were also suffering. Strange events became harder to ignore. Several cattle disappeared from farms near the hills. Children woke screaming in the night, saying they saw tall shadows outside their windows. One of Daniel's closest friends, a young mechanic named Omar, who often joked about the rumors, suddenly went missing. His shop was left open, his tools scattered, but no one saw where he had gone. The officials claimed he had moved for work, but everyone knew it was not true. Daniel felt anger and fear twist inside him. He had never wanted to be part of something like this. He was just a guard, a man earning money to live quietly. But now he was caught in a struggle far bigger than himself. If he stayed silent, he would become part of the cover-up. If he spoke, he could vanish like Omar. One night, as Daniel patrolled near the hangar, he heard the sound again, the heartbeat, louder than ever. But this time it was joined by another sound, a faint cry that echoed through the tunnels like a voice trying to speak, but unable to form words. Daniel froze, his hands trembling. He realized then that the Queen was not just an experiment, not just a project. She was alive, suffering in the darkness, and her existence was being hidden from the world. As he walked away from the tunnel, Daniel made a silent promise to himself. He could not allow this secret to stay buried. He did not know how or when, but he would find a way to reveal the truth. He would carry it beyond the fences of the base, beyond the lies of the officials. The world had to know what had been created and concealed beneath their feet. But deep down, Daniel also knew the cost. By choosing the path of truth, he was stepping into danger that might consume him completely. He was no longer just a guard. He was the only one who had the courage to listen to the hidden heartbeat of the Queen, and that made him a threat to those who wanted silence. The night air was heavy when Daniel walked to the base again. He carried no weapon, only a small notebook in his pocket, filled with the evidence he had gathered. His heart pounded harder than it ever had before. He knew the moment was near when he would have to decide, stay silent forever or bring the truth into the light. Inside the base, activity was more intense than ever. Guards stood at every corner and officers moved quickly with radios in their hands. Something had happened. Daniel sensed it in the hurried footsteps and sharp orders. The air was filled with tension, like a storm waiting to break. That night, the underground tunnels echoed with strange sounds. Daniel could feel vibrations under his boots. The Queen was awake. The officers whispered about moving her to another location, but their voices trembled with doubt. Moving her meant risk. Keeping her there meant even greater danger. Daniel slipped away from his post and returned to the secret corridor he had discovered before. He knew the keypad door would not open for him, but he had no intention of forcing it. Instead, he pressed his ear to the cold metal surface. Behind the door, he heard the thumping heartbeat stronger than ever, and the sound of chains rattling. Then to his shock, he heard a low, broken voice whispering words he could barely understand. He stumbled back, fear and awe mixing inside him. She was not only alive, but trying to speak. The Queen, the secret project, the concealed creation. They had tried to silence her, but her voice was breaking through. Daniel ran from the corridor, his mind made up. He could not remain part of this any longer. That night he took the notebook, the copied documents and the photographs, and placed them all into a small metal box. He buried the box beneath the old oak tree outside the town, a place only he knew. Even if they took him away, the truth would survive. The following days grew darker. More people in town went missing. Military trucks filled the roads and helicopters circled the skies. The government released new statements, claiming they were building research centers for the good of the people. But the townsfolk no longer believed them. Whispers grew louder and fear spread like smoke. One evening, Daniel left the base for the last time. He did not take the main road. Instead, he walked through the fields, his eyes fixed on the horizon where the sun was rising. In his pocket was a single drive, the final piece of evidence he had managed to save. He knew the risk of carrying it, but he also knew the world deserved to see what had been concealed for so long. He walked steadily, every step carrying him, farther from the fences, from the lies, and from the secret heartbeat beneath the earth. He did not know if he would survive the journey ahead. He did not know if the world was ready to hear about the Queen, but he knew one thing with certainty. Silence was no longer possible. As the morning light touched his face, Daniel felt a strange calm. Behind him, the base stood like a fortress of secrets. Beneath it, the Queen still lived, waiting for the moment when her existence would no longer be hidden. Ahead of him lay the unknown, but also the chance to finally reveal what had been concealed. Daniel tightened his grip on the small drive and walked on. He was no longer just a guard. He was the keeper of a truth that could change everything.